Today, talks of a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon.
Even if a ceasefire comes, what does it look like? Will it look like the 2024 ceasefire, where the Israelis continue to attack for 15 months?
After weeks of intense Israeli bombardment, what's left for people to return to in Lebanon? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hey, everyone. Whether you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify or listening on your favorite podcast app, we want to hear from you. Head over to your nearest comment section for The Take and let us know what you think of the show. Leave us a review and a story idea for what you'd like us to cover on an upcoming episode. I love getting to read your thoughts. And until then, here's today's show.
I'm Justin Salhani. I'm a senior producer with Al Jazeera's digital team in Beirut.
Well, Justin, welcome back to The Take. So we're sitting down on Wednesday evening Beirut time, hearing reports that a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon could be announced within hours. You're in Beirut. What are you hearing?
So essentially, it's still early. There's going to be an Israeli cabinet meeting tonight, and a decision may come from that. A Hezbollah MP has said that there's the possibility of a 1-week ceasefire that would be tied to the US-Iranian negotiations. That being said, there's still news coming out that the Israeli military had decided yesterday of how to continue the war in Lebanon and in Iran. So for now, it's still kind of hearsay and crosstalk. We're waiting to see what happens. On the ground, though, I can tell you I live next door to a school which has been turned into a displacement center. And the people have been singing for the last couple of hours and dancing and celebrating, waving flags. So I think the messages are getting around. The hope is getting up. But as is the case with these sort of situations, we're waiting to see what will happen.
People are celebrating. So that means, even though the skeptic in me says 1-week ceasefire does not sound long enough, for some, that is welcome relief.
Absolutely. I mean, the war has been brutal. This latest intensification has been brutal. We're up at the point we've gotten past 2,000 people, 2,000 deaths, 2,000 people killed by the Israelis. Last Wednesday was the bloodiest day in Beirut that we've had in recent memory.
Israel has this afternoon carried out its heaviest strikes on Lebanon since the war began. Airstrikes hit the very centre of Beirut this afternoon, as well as the southern suburbs. No warning was given before the strikes. The Israeli military said it hit about 100 locations, describing them as Hezbollah sites.
There were over 350 people killed around the country, and a lot of those were in Beirut itself, in neighborhoods that had not been hit before. And not far from my house was at least a couple of them. So the people, as I mentioned, in the school that are displaced from places like the southern suburbs, from the Bekaa and from the south, will have heard those, will have experienced those. And I think even a week's respite to be able to go home and take a warm shower or things of that nature will be welcome for those who can. Of course, the Israelis are still on the ground in the south, and there's a lot of details we still don't know. For example, does that mean the Israelis will pull out? There's obviously battles ongoing in places like Bint Jbeil and Hisham in the south, strategic towns near the border. And so even if a ceasefire comes, what does it look like? Will it look like the 2024 ceasefire, where the Israelis continue to attack for 15 months? But I think at least what might be is a respite for some in the country, an opportunity to be able to go back home, gather some things, spend some time, check in on loved ones, and recalibrate a bit.
So we're speaking a day after these historic talks were held in Washington, D.C. between the ambassadors of Lebanon and Israel, alongside the U.S. Secretary of State. And I say historic because they were the first direct negotiations between Israel and Lebanon in decades. A lot was riding on that D.C. meeting. How did it go down in Lebanon? How much of an impact do you think it's had?
There's a lot of polarization around this issue at the moment. We have essentially a large percentage of the population who actively opposed these negotiations, who felt that direct negotiations with the Israelis was not something that they wanted, and they don't feel represented by the government in these negotiations. On the other side, you have people who are saying, this is something that is inevitable, something that has to happen. Diplomacy is something that needs to go on. So there's a big divide at the moment. Like I mentioned, it's a polarizing issue because the Israelis have been attacking Lebanon for the last going on almost 3 years now, 2.5 years. Thousands of people have lost their lives, their homes, their livelihoods, their villages have been detonated and destroyed. So, I mean, these negotiations are something that the state is doing as an effort to maybe reclaim their agency, their authority. But at the same time, on the ground, there's a big split. And I think there's a large percentage of the population who doesn't look at them as something that they feel something positive will come out of it. The Israelis have shown themselves not to be a good faith actor, a good faith negotiator. And I should say that even on the other side, I don't think that there's a lot of trust in the Israelis at all, or a lot of belief in the Israelis at all. But there is a feeling on this other side, the side that has a bit more support for the negotiations, of Lebanon being caught between two difficult places in a difficult decision. It's not an ideal scenario, but it's something that a part of the country feels needs to happen. And it's something that the other part of the country actively opposes and has been very viscerally vocal about that, including with protests down in downtown over the last week. There were 2 fairly large protests that gathered hundreds, if not thousands of people.
Protests against the talks.
Yeah, exactly. Protests actively opposing direct negotiations with the Israelis.
Hezbollah is the only resistant power in Lebanon, and we are here because we are standing for them, and we cannot accept what our president and our leaders are doing because it's illegal.
Well, the backdrop here is the ceasefire between Iran and the U.S. Iran wanted Lebanon to be part of it. Israel had been rejecting that, saying they wouldn't stop until they've disarmed and destroyed Hezbollah. Meanwhile, Hezbollah was very clearly against these talks, accusing the Lebanese government of, quote, squandering Lebanon's political and military strength.
Does the government not realize the danger of what it has undertaken? And does it understand that it has entered a wrong path that leads only to increasing the rift among the Lebanese? It has obtained nothing from the enemy except praise without achieving any demand. Shouldn't this government reconsider its calculations and abandon this course?
So given that, plus the protests you mentioned, the segment of society that did not want these talks to happen in the first place, can you see this holding?
Yeah, I mean, we're in such a gray space right now. It's really difficult to say how tightly linked is Lebanon, in the case of Lebanon, to Iran. It's really, so much of this is up to the United States and really outside of the hands of the Lebanese themselves. So like I mentioned, entering into these talks was an effort by the Lebanese government to exercise some form of agency, some form of saying that, we have a state and we are acting on behalf of the state. If that can uphold is another question entirely. It's up to the Israelis deciding they want to do this, and the Americans deciding that they want to hold the Israelis accountable. Of course, until now, we have not seen the Americans hold the Israelis accountable. So that's why we come back to this issue of a lack of trust in this process. Naim Qassem, the head of Hezbollah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, came out recently and said, we need a consensus. We need a national consensus. And I think that there's truth in what he says, in that there does need to be some kind of consensus. The problem is that a lot of Hezbollah's critics might argue that Hezbollah has acted without a consensus in recent years. At times they've acted against what would have been, maybe a wider consensus. And so now to come back and call for this consensus, there's really not a lot of trust in Hezbollah by their critics. And there's not a lot of trust in this government right now by people who don't feel supported by it, which includes many of the people in the South, in places like the southern suburbs, and others who are among the majority of the displaced at the moment.
Well, Justin, we touched on this earlier. A ceasefire might be some comfort for some of the 1.2 million people who've been displaced and who are just waiting to go home. But Israel's attacks have already changed what home looks like.
People want to live. The land of the South is gone and people are gone. And then what? Will they just stay like this?
Can you talk about the impact this war has had on people?
Yeah, I think when we talk about these sort of things, we need to expand our vocabulary a bit at times. There are things like herbicide and domicide. the destruction of cities, the destruction of a place where people live. So we can obviously talk about Dahya, and I wrote a piece in 2024 that talked about the herbicide of Dahya, destroying it as an urban fabric, a place where when you remove one building, you're removing not just the homes, but you're removing all the interactions and all the memories and all the things that this was as a vibrant place. Now in the South, we've seen recently videos go viral, and some of these videos are shared by the Israeli military themselves, the demolition of entire villages, and they post these, excuse me for this word, but spectacular videos. And I mean that in the sense of like, it's almost unbelievable in how they do this line of just explosions. And so one of those villages is Naura. And I visited a family from Naura just a couple days ago. And I had met them about a year ago in Naura itself. It's a border village by the sea. There's a big UN presence. A lot of the families there intermarry with the UN. And there was this elderly couple that I met. When we visited them at the time, he had these fruit trees. A few of them had been uprooted out of the ground, and it was hard to find a military reason for that. It seemed like just pure cruelty and revenge, if you will, or malice. There were cracks in the foundation of his house. He said he fixed all those, but now after these demolitions, his home is gone again. His children's home, his other relatives' homes are gone. This has also been repeated in other villages, including Taibe and Der Sirian. And then at the same time, there's massive bombing campaigns as ongoing battles happen, as I mentioned, in Khiam and Bint Jbel. So you have homes that are gone, of course. And so not just homes, but infrastructure, roads, businesses. So in Bint Jbel, I believe the historic souk, which was destroyed in the last war, people came and set up again and started to rebuild it and started to still have this like weekly market where people would come and sell goods or agriculture or other things. This has again been attacked and bombed and destroyed, if I'm not mistaken. And so you have this rebuilding process that will happen again. But again, it's not just about the homes, it's the entire infrastructure. So if, for example, you're a family, maybe you found a job outside during this period because you need to survive and continue to provide for your family. Maybe your kids have integrated into a new school. You're preventing the return for a variety of reasons. So even if the people can physically reach their land again, there is the potential that they cannot go back because practically it's difficult. If the hospitals are no longer there, if the healthcare has been destroyed, if the schools are no longer fit to host and teach your children. So this is the destruction of societies in a sense.
Justin, you mentioned Naura and the man you met there with the fruit trees. That's also the hometown of one of Al Jazeera's correspondents, Ali Hashim, who's in Iran reporting right now, who we've talked to several times. I wonder, what happens and where do people go when their entire town is reduced to rubble? Where have they fled to? Where are they living?
Yeah, I spoke to Ali about this just a few days ago, and he's been hit personally by these destructions as well. Some of these people will veer towards the capitals, and this is what happened during the Civil War when there was such damages in the South. A lot of people move to suburban areas around the city Beirut or in the city itself, because that's where the jobs are. That's where the economic opportunity is. A lot of these people this time are also going to nearby cities. So I've spoken to displaced people that have moved up to Tir in the south, which is a coastal city in the south. It has also received an evacuation warning. Some people are still choosing to stay because they fear that they may never be able to return to their lands, their homes. Many people had gone and stayed in Nabatieh, and they were there in the quote unquote ceasefire period, and had set up or either rented homes or stayed in other such places in the south, places that had something of a proximity. Of course, many of these people have been displaced again, so they've been displaced multiple times. And this is, of course, with the assumption that, with the war ongoing, they're going and staying in other places. Now, if the war ends and their entire, as we mentioned, entire village or home, the infrastructure around it is destroyed, then they have to make a choice. The choice can be to go back if they can access those lands, if the Israelis are still not firing them, because we have to remember the Israelis are still occupying 5 points in southern Lebanon. And they have stated an intention to expand that at one point up to the Litani River. Now it seems the discussion seems to be more reaching up to 8 kilometers inside Lebanese territory. It's still unclear how that will happen and what they will decide to do, but they've made the intention clear that they want something of a buffer zone, an uninhabitable area where, people are not able to go. And if somebody does end up there, the Israelis might have a free rein to attack, to fire on them. So essentially, even if tomorrow we have a ceasefire, there will be people who cannot physically reach their homes. And even the ones who physically can reach their homes, there is the question about infrastructure, society around you. Is it inhabitable? Some people will be steadfast. They'll set up tents. They'll rebuild with their hands. They'll put whatever remaining money they have into it.
Kafr is all destroyed. There is not a single stone left. But God willing, we'll go on these tents you see here that we made. God willing, we'll put them up on the ground tomorrow and settle up there and rebuild. God willing, we'll rebuild and go back to how we were.
Others, there's a practicality question. And so this is history repeating itself, where we'll see more waves of migration into other parts of the country.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Israel's plan and strategy, really, in southern Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently visited southern Lebanon right in the middle of this escalation.
One of the things we are seeing here is that we have essentially changed the face of the Middle East. Our enemies, Iran and the axis of evil, came to destroy us, and now they are simply fighting for their survival.
What message was he trying to send with that visit? And of course, you can't get into his head, but what message did people in Lebanon take away from that visit?
So the culture minister, Hassan Saleh, said something like this was a despicable act. This was as far as I think Lebanese people are concerned, this was an act of provocation. And this is something that Netanyahu, and not only Netanyahu, but other members of his government have done repeatedly. They've tried to undermine any sort of good faith approach with the Lebanese. And so this is why, this is one of the reasons why there's just so little trust between so many in Lebanon and the Israelis, particularly the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. It's not the first time that they've provoked. I think it also extends to, every time there's any kind of negotiations, anytime there is sort of an agreement, a ceasefire, the efforts from people like Netanyahu in his position are to try to, as we say in Lebanon, throw oil on the fire a bit and try to just get people to be emotional. He's also undermined every effort at a ceasefire until now, and anything that's gone in that sort of direction. And the reports seem to be that while Trump and the Americans are pushing hard for it, the Israelis may want to continue, especially in Lebanon. So I think it was just a means of provoking, of trying to get people in the country angry and maybe figuring out a way to continue the war in Lebanon. Because it seems to be that is something that he will, if not now, want to return to at some point.
Well, finally, Justin, we talked about the large-scale displacement and destruction that people in Lebanon are having to cope with now. This isn't the first time we're hearing news of a ceasefire. Whether or not it takes hold, whether or not it sticks, remain to be seen. But you have seen this firsthand before. You've reported on it. You've lived through it time and time again. So what is your take on what happens next?
So typically before a ceasefire, we expect some kind of intensification. I think I came on your show a little over a year and a half ago, right after the 2024 ceasefire had been declared. And that last day was the roughest day for Beirut, for sure. Yeah. This time around, last Wednesday was the day that we didn't really expect, where attacks had happened all over the city. So Beirut has been kind of quiet for the last few days. If that will hold, who knows? There seems to be some sort of agreement going on. At least this is what's being reported in the news. So it's relatively quiet, though the drones still have been out in force overhead. Today, not so much, but in recent days and nights, they've been quite present. But at the same time, as we mentioned, these battles in the south are ongoing. There have been many strikes in South Lebanon in the last days. And even when the strikes subsided in Beirut, they continued in the south. And we're still seeing high numbers and high casualty counts. So I think what we should expect, again, there's a debate over whether a ceasefire will actually land and come to fruition. But the interim, these last few hours are a time where I think a lot of Lebanese will be watching their shoulders, particularly those in the south who have stayed in the south. And that includes, it's important to say, journalists, medics, who have been targeted directly by the Israelis in double tap strikes. So these last few hours are something where we're going to have to keep our eyes wide open, and we don't really know what to expect. But an intensification is something that has historical precedence.
Well, Justin, I hope you're able to remain safe, you and your loved ones, and thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.